Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu News Analysis. So before we begin today's discussion, let me wish all the UPSC Mains aspirants all the very best. Because as we speak, the Mains examination would have started today. So wish all the very best for the Mains aspirants. And also head to our Telegram channel because we shall be sharing all the question papers, the Mains question papers, as soon as the exam gets over. So let's begin with today's discussion by first looking at the topics we are going to cover in the analysis. I have chosen a total of 9 articles from the Delhi edition of the Hindu, and I have taken 3 articles for a detailed discussion. So we also have a number of prelims topics in today's newspaper. So let's study and analyze and discuss all these topics in complete detail. So before we start, why don't you press the like button? Share the video with other aspirants as well, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's begin with the first article from page number 8 that deals with a very important government scheme, that is the Jal Jeevan Mission. The article itself does not provide much content for us, but the article does examine the progress that Jal Jeevan Mission has been making. So let's expand this discussion and let's have a detailed debate on this topic. Let's start with what is Jal Jeevan Mission. Let's understand the salient features of the mission, which is very important for your prelims. You can even expect a mains question on this. And then we shall see the progress that has been made under Jal Jeevan Mission. We shall critically evaluate the implementation of this important scheme. The Jal Jeevan Mission was launched by the Government of India in 2019 with the objective of providing tapped water connection to every rural household in the country. This initiative has been branded as the Har Ghar Jal initiative, which clearly indicates the objective of the mission. The mission is looking to provide 55 liters of clean drinking water per person per day to every rural household in the country by 2024. So it's a very ambitious target that has been set to provide functional tap water connection. The focus of the mission is to provide piped water connection through functional taps in every single household by 2024. So this would mean that crores of households had to be covered, because as of 2019, the coverage of tapped water connection in our rural areas was very, very low. Later, an urban component of the mission also has been launched to ensure that clean tapped water connections are available in urban areas as well. So this focuses on universal coverage. It does not leave anyone behind. It focuses on both rural and urban areas. And that is why this mission has the best potential to help India achieve Sustainable Development Goal number 6. Under the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Goal number 6 deals with clean water and sanitation, because providing clean drinking water supply is crucial with regard to health, hygiene and nutrition, especially for women, children, right? When clean drinking water is not available, it can lead to several diseases, and it even increases infant mortality, child mortality and maternal mortality. So providing potable drinking water that is clean, that is safe and hygienic is extremely crucial with regard to maternal health and infant and child health as well. So this goal of the UN Sustainable Development Program, that is goal number 6, can be realized in India through this ambitious mission. It ensures that adequate water supply is provided at the level of each individual, not just at the level of a village or a household, but at the level of each individual. Because the goal is to provide 55 liters of clean drinking water per person per day in every rural household. This will also help us move away from our dependency on water pumps, that is bore wells, where we depend heavily on groundwater for drinking purposes. Especially in rural areas where there is a shortage of drinking water, there is a heavy reliance and dependency on groundwater. And as you know, groundwater, as it is overexploited, the groundwater can be polluted with various contaminants. that over-dependency on groundwater for drinking purposes not only causes further exploitation of the groundwater table, which has environmental consequences, but it could also have serious health consequences because of the contaminants and the pollutants that could be present in the groundwater. So this is where the mission makes a very big difference with regard to health, hygiene and sanitation. The mission aims to create a Jan Andolan, a community-led movement from the grassroots with regard to drinking water. Just like the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan created a Andolan or a movement at the community level with regard to cleanliness, hygiene and sanitation, similarly the Jal Jeevan Mission aims to create a Jal Andolan starting from the grassroots. This important mission is implemented through the Jal Shakti Ministry, and the fund sharing pattern of the scheme is as below. These facts could be very important for your prelims. The center provides 90% of the funding for Himalayan states and northeastern states, and the rest of the 10% is shared by the state governments, because these states face several challenges because of their remote location and the difficult terrain and geography. Whereas for all the other states, the funding ratio is 50:50. And of course, for all union territories, the center provides 100% of the funding. Now, under this program, there is focus on managing water sources and also on managing demand for drinking water. So it's a very holistic program that way. The mission tries to prioritize water source management, managing water at the source itself to ensure enough availability of water, to ensure cleanliness of water, to ensure the water is purified to meet the drinking standards. So all these measures have to be taken at the source, and at the same time towards the demand side. The demand has to be managed with focus on water conservation to prevent water leakage and water wastage. So all these aspects of water management are integral to this mission. This mission prioritizes the recharge and reuse of water resources. It focuses on grey water management and provides priority for water treatment plants where water is thoroughly filtered and treated through the right processes, and even the water is chlorinated in different stages to ensure that all harmful contaminants are removed, so that the water becomes fit for drinking. It also prioritizes water conservation to manage water demand and ensure that we reduce water wastage, because it takes a lot of effort and money to purify water and supply the water through piped connections. Right? The water has to be pumped. This requires a lot of electricity as well. It requires investments in massive pumps that can supply the water, and creating the tapped connections in every household is a capital and resource intensive exercise. So that is why water conservation becomes important, because you cannot waste this precious resource, and there should be focus on rainwater harvesting as well, as rainwater can be collected, then filtered, purified and then provided for drinking purposes. So this mission focuses both on the source and the demand side, and it provides for a community-led approach. Especially at the grassroots, the local bodies play a key role in its implementation. At the level of Gram Panchayats, Gram Sabhas, these institutions of decentralized governance, they play a critical role along with local community members. So the mission also involves a lot of awareness, education initiatives to make the people aware of the mission and as well as make them realize the importance of water conservation. So these are the key components of Jal Jeevan Mission, and according to the Jal Shakti Ministry, the mission has been a remarkable success in the last few years. This data I have taken from the dashboard, the live dashboard that the Jal Shakti Ministry has created, which helps you track the progress of this mission. According to the dashboard data, more than 19 crore households in the country have been provided with functional tap water connections in the last 4 years. This is a remarkable achievement, which means crores of people today have access to clean drinking water even in rural areas, and the coverage has gone up to more than 68% on a national average. The goal is to achieve 100% national coverage in the coming years. Of course, the target is 2024. It's a very ambitious target. Even if India overshoots the target by a couple of years and still achieves 100% coverage, let's say by 2025, 2026, it would still be a remarkable achievement. Just look at the map here. You can see the massive transformation that has happened with regard to tapped water connections and how the coverage has increased since the start of Jal Jeevan Mission. Across the country, hardly around 25 to 30% of the states had coverage with regard to tapped water connection. Now today we are getting closer to 100% in most of the states. You can see how the coverage has gone up, and some states are already getting closer to 95%, 98% coverage, which means Jal Jeevan Mission has seen a remarkable success, at least according to the government. And the biggest impact of the mission will be on children and women, especially with regard to infant mortality rate, child mortality rate, and maternal mortality rate. We are seeing a direct impact because contaminated water is extremely harmful. Children suffer from chronic and severe diarrhea, which causes death and even affects their nutritional status, leading to several deficiencies, which affects their overall health and well-being. The Jal Shakti Ministry has data to back this claim that child mortality rate has declined. At least 1.36 lakh death of children has been averted because of the mission, and more than 4 lakh deaths of children through diarrhea has been averted because of the provision of clean drinking water through tapped connections in rural areas. So this again is another important fact which highlights the success of the Jal Jeevan Mission. Now let us see what the article in the Hindu is talking about. The journalist from Hindu is paying a visit to a district in Uttar Pradesh, a rural district in UP, to track the progress of this mission. And the writer finds out that there is a remarkable progress in the Mahoba district under Jal Jeevan Mission. In 2019, before the mission was launched, the coverage of tapped water connections was just 1.2% in the district. Today, in just 4 years, this has increased to 97.5%. It's almost achieving 100% universal coverage. So definitely with regard to coverage, the scheme is a remarkable success. With regard to providing tapped connections to every rural household, the scheme has seen a remarkable success. One of the biggest beneficiaries of the mission would be rural women. Because in rural areas where water supply is not easily available, there is a huge burden on women to fetch water from faraway sources. In a patriarchal society where household tasks are largely placed on women, right, which puts a burden on women, right? This is part of our social problems as well, where women have to take responsibility of all the household chores. In such a scenario, in such a social setup, women have to take a lot of risks to just fetch water in rural areas. They will have to walk towards a well or a bore well located many kilometers away, right? This not only affects their health and well-being, it also exposes them to several security risks. So for women, the burden of work has gone down. It has eased the burden on women in rural areas. All right, so this is another positive regarding the Jal Jeevan Mission. But however, the acceptance of the mission is still low in the Mahoba district. That is what the Hindu finds out. There are few drawbacks, there are few shortcomings which can be addressed. One problem is that in rural areas, villagers believe that groundwater is more tastier. And they are not wrong. Because see, when water is purified through chlorination and multiple stages of filtration, essential minerals will get taken out, which affects the taste of the water as well, right? So especially older people will be very particular about the taste of water, and the villagers complain that groundwater is more suitable for drinking as they like the taste. So there is a lower preference to use the tapped connection for drinking purposes. What they're doing is they're using the tapped water for other reasons, for cleaning, for other chores. But they don't prefer it for drinking in certain households because they're not liking the taste, because excessive chlorination does change the taste, which is not very suitable for the palate. So this is a behavioral issue as well, and this is where acceptance rates are lower. And also please understand that another big impact of the mission is that it is reducing our dependency on groundwater for drinking purposes. I hope you know that the groundwater table is already overexploited in India, mainly for irrigation, right? And if we depend heavily on groundwater for drinking purposes as well, through bore wells and hand pumps, this further increases the stress on the groundwater table, right? So with tapped water connection, you can push the people away from depending on groundwater for drinking purposes, thus relieving the stress on the groundwater table. And also it provides more water for irrigation. So it will help in reducing the stress on the groundwater table and provides for more water for irrigation as well. And a big challenge being faced in rural areas here is that when water is being supplied through pipes and tapped connections across hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, right? Water is being pumped through multiple stages. There are multiple stages of treatment. So across this entire process, there will be water leakage. Pipes will break, walls might not function well. So this becomes a logistical challenge, an operational challenge. The issue of fixing the leakage becomes another problem, because to fix the leak, water supply has to be stopped. Many times the local authorities have to stop the water supply across the entire region, across the entire village, to find out where the leak is present and to fix the leak. So logistical operational issues have come up, which is also affecting the acceptance and implementation of the scheme. And the other important issue is that people will need overhead tanks and submersible pumps. If you're getting water through a tapped piped connection, right, water may not be available 24/7, right? It's not that you open the tap and you get water throughout the day. Water will be provided maybe for few hours a day. So it means each household have to store the water. So they have to build a tank, right? They have to build a sump. There should be an overhead tank as well. And they need submersible pumps to pump the water to the overhead tank. Now this is an extra expenditure, and many rural households are not willing to make this extra expenditure because they can't afford it. It's a genuine concern, and this is also affecting the acceptance of the mission on the ground, right? Because it involves a lot of extra expenditure. Rural households, all of them may not be able to afford this. So these are some of the shortcomings and the areas where improvements can be done. But otherwise, the mission has been a remarkable success. So please understand all these key points, because you can get a mains question asking you to talk about the provisions of the mission and to track and evaluate the progress that has been made, right? So with this, let's take a look at the next article. We have an important column on page number 10 that is related to climate change and environment and ecology. This column is being brought out in the context of the global renewable energy target that was recently announced, which was also included in the G20 Delhi Declaration as well. See, this year, the 28th Conference of Parties, the COP28 of the Climate Change Convention or the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, is all set to be held at Dubai. So UAE is currently holding the presidency of the Climate Change Convention. So UAE is going to host COP28, and as part of this responsibility, UAE has introduced a proposal. It has proposed a new target. It has proposed a new target to be achieved by the end of the decade with regard to renewable energy capacity in the world. The goal is to triple renewable energy investments to achieve 3 times the current renewable energy capacity by the end of the decade in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. With the objective of reducing GHG emissions, that is carbon emissions, the UAE has proposed this ambitious target as it is currently holding the presidency of COP28. It has set a target of tripling the renewable energy capacity by the end of the decade. This target also finds a mention in the G20 declaration. So it's in this context that the column has been brought out, and the writers are examining where we stand with regard to renewable energy installation and capacity. Can we achieve this target? Is it realistic? And are there any issues for countries like India in order to achieve this target? So this is a very important assessment that the writers are carrying out. So let us begin this discussion by looking at the current adoption of renewable energy in the world. Let's see where the world stands when it comes to adoption of renewable energy today. According to data from 2021, if you look at the global installed capacity of renewable energy sources, that is from hydropower, solar, wind, etc., 39% of the total capacity is coming from renewable energy. Out of the total installed capacity of electricity, right? If you take a look at all the sources, from renewable energy, the installed capacity is 39%, which means the installed capacity right now stands at around 3026 gigawatts. So from here, if we have to triple, which means 3x capacity has to be achieved, which means the world should have an installed capacity of 9000 gigawatts by 2030. That is the target. That is how you quantify the target. Right now, the world has an installed capacity of 3026 gigawatts of renewable energy. All right? Installed capacity is just the potential, right? But the actual production would be slightly lesser. The utilization of the installed capacity will be lesser due to various operational reasons. Because some of the plants, power plants may not function all the time. Like solar plants, for example, they don't generate electricity all the time. Wind power plants, hydro plants, they can't generate electricity continuously. There will be operational issues, repair, servicing, etc. So the actual electricity generated would be slightly lesser than the installed capacity. Right now, the installed capacity is at around 3000 gigawatts. So tripling the capacity means we should achieve a capacity of 9000 gigawatts by 2030, and that is the target that UAE is pushing for. Through the Climate Change Convention, this is the target being pursued. The other countries are yet to accept the target. All right? So right now, the utilization is just around 28%. Out of the 39% installed capacity of renewable energy sources, only 28% of the electricity is coming from renewable energy sources. All right? Out of this, more than 50% is coming from hydropower. More than 50% of renewable energy being produced, it's coming from hydropower plants. And another 13% from solar and 23% from wind, which accounts for 10% of electricity generated from all sources, even from non-renewable sources. Is that clear? So understanding this data is very important. It helps you understand where the world stands. What is the current pattern with regard to electricity generation in the world? So 39% of the current electricity sources are renewable energy sources. 28% of the total electricity being produced is coming from your renewable sources, and more than half of it is coming from hydropower plants. 13% from solar, 23% from wind. Now, based on this data, we can analyze the challenges to achieve the target and what challenges lie ahead for India. See, under the 2030 global renewable energy target, to achieve a 9000 gigawatt capacity, it's not going to be an easy task. Because see, we will have to depend mostly on solar and wind projects to achieve this target, because it's a very ambitious target. I hope you know that it takes a lot of time to build hydropower plants. We hardly have another 7 years left, 6.5 years left. So this time is not enough to build multiple hydropower plants in the world. The timeline is very tight. Because to build a hydropower plant, it might take on almost a decade to identify the site, to conduct all the examinations, the explorations, get all the approvals, and then execute the construction, right? It takes a lot of time before hydropower plants can become operational. So if the world is trying to achieve this target, let's say we want to triple the renewable energy target and all the countries try working towards it, then most countries will have to rely on solar power and wind power, because hydropower will not be the right option. Some of the hydro projects will continue, but you can't entirely rely on it because the timeline is very tight. We may not be able to complete those projects within the deadline. Now, since countries will have to depend more on solar and wind power, the expenditure would be higher for them. Because even today, solar and wind energy, they are costlier. The technology needed, the materials, they still remain expensive despite the increasing adoption of clean renewable energy. Even though India and the world are widely adopting solar and wind energy, still the cost remains high, the per unit cost remains high. The investment in these projects remains high, which means the money required would be higher as well. That becomes the major concern. So one concern is the tight deadline. Can we really triple the capacity in just 7 years? Second concern is the cost involved. Can all countries afford the higher expenditure, because most of them have to rely on solar and wind power to achieve the target? Now coming to the next concern, the concern about equitability. Can this target be distributed equitably to all the countries? Because when it comes to climate change, when it comes to reducing emissions, there has always been a divide between developed countries and developing countries. I'm sure many of you are aware of this debate. Ever since the climate change negotiations began in the 1990s, since then there has been a strong divide between developed nations and developing nations. I was mentioning this yesterday as well in yesterday's Hindu analysis. Developed countries, they became developed because they got the luxury to burn fossil fuels for 150 plus years. If you look at US, European countries and others, they have become industrialized, they have become advanced economies, they have solved their basic social and economic problems because they got the liberty to freely burn fossil fuels without restrictions. Since the start of Industrial Revolution, throughout the World War period and the post-war period, these countries have freely burned fossil fuels, they have overexploited fossil fuels. That is what powered their economic growth, right? So these developed nations, they are largely responsible for historical emissions. And accordingly, they should own up for historical emissions and take up historical responsibility as well. Which means they have to contribute more when it comes to reducing emissions. They have to invest more to transition away from fossil fuels towards clean energy. They have to provide finance and technology as well to developing underdeveloped countries because they find it difficult to access finance and technology. And more importantly, this is fair. This is a question of fairness. It's a question of equitability. Because developing and underdeveloped countries are not responsible for historical emissions. Even if you take the major emerging countries of today, like India, Brazil, China, today we might be the top emitters, but historically we haven't been the top emitters. Today we are ready to take action for what we are emitting, but how about historical emissions? What about historical responsibilities? This has always been a point of contestation between developed nations and developing countries. We have seen this during every climate change summit. When Kyoto Protocol was agreed, when Paris Agreement was signed, this debate has always come up, and it is a fair argument as well that developed nations which are responsible for historical emissions, they should take the bigger burden. Right? It should not be an unfair equation where developing underdeveloped nations have to invest more for the mistakes they haven't committed in the past. So this question has to be examined in detail. Again, the writers are presenting very valuable data to point out how this new target might put an unnecessary burden on developing nations while giving an easier path for developed countries. That is the big concern the writers are expressing. Because see, the demand for electricity is not the same around the world. It is regionally differentiated in every country, right? The demand for electricity is different, and usually this is dependent on their development status. It's dependent on the rate at which they are growing. If you look at today's global economy, the fast and rapidly growing economies like India, China, and others, they require more electricity. Correct? India is one of the fastest growing countries today. China, Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, all these countries are emerging economies, which means they are driving more industrial growth, which means they need more electricity. So demand for electricity is more in developing world today, not in the developed world. The growth in electricity demand that you expect will come largely from developing nations. As they develop, as they grow, they will require more electricity. Whereas the same burden does not exist on developed nations. Developed nations, which are hitting a saturation in their growth levels, they are seeing decelerated growth as well. Their demand for electricity is going to stay stagnant, or it will remain where it is, or it increases by a very small margin. Now, given this fact, the developed world represented by European Union, US and other industrialized economies, they may not have the same burden of investing in solar and wind power. Because see, if they don't phase out fossil fuels by 2030, imagine that US and EU and other industrialized economies, they have no target to phase out fossil fuels by the end of the decade. They already have a very high percentage of fossil fuels in their electricity basket, which means they have to make a very small investment to achieve the renewable energy target and claim that they have succeeded in their goal. Because the data clearly shows that in this global target of tripling renewable energy by 2030, the share for developed nations like US will only be 0.4%. If they keep relying on fossil fuels, if they don't phase out fossil fuels by 2030, US will have to install only 26 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity to meet the target. Out of the 9,000 gigawatts target for the world, US will install only 26 gigawatts, that is 0.4% of the share. And still US can claim it has achieved the target, and it can blame others who haven't achieved the target. For a country like India, which is growing at a rapid pace where electricity demand is more, we will have to make a bigger investment to have a capacity of 717 gigawatts, which is a share of 12% in the global target. So India, which is not responsible for historical emissions, will end up incurring more cost, will end up making more investments in solar and wind energy as compared to rich countries like US, which are responsible for historical emissions. This is the unfairness in the target if developed countries do not commit to phase out fossil fuels. So that is why the writers are pointing out the current proposed target to triple renewable energy capacity lacks equity. It's not equitable. It's not fair. It places a bigger burden on developing countries. So the writers are suggesting to India and other developing nations to agree to this target only if the developed nations agree to an equitable solution. The global north, represented by the developed advanced economies, only if they agree to an equitable target, only if they agree for domestic action within their economy to phase out fossil fuels and increase their investments in renewable energy and share technology with developing nations, only then countries like India and other developing nations should take on this target to triple the renewable energy capacity. Is that clear? It's a very important argument and an assessment that the writers are bringing out. Coming to the next article, on the same page, we have a column that examines the post office bill, which the government has tabled in the Rajya Sabha recently. Just before the monsoon session came to an end, the new post office bill has been introduced in the Rajya Sabha, and it seeks to replace the Indian Post Office Act of 1898. I'm sure all of you know the incredible role that India Post has played in India's story. Many of you might think today post is irrelevant, right? With the evolution of computers, internet, social media and other forms of communication, many of you might assume that post has become irrelevant, right? But the beauty about Indian Post is that it has adapted to all the changes. It has adapted, it has evolved, and India Post even today plays a critical role in our economy. All right, so let's examine that. Currently, postal services in India are regulated, it's governed through a colonial law, that is the Indian Post Office Act of 1898. So it's a colonial origin law. So the new bill will repeal this colonial law. The 1898 Act will be repealed and it will be replaced by the new Post Office Act. So the bill has been tabled. It's yet to be taken up for discussion in the next session. Of course, the bill will come up for discussion and it might be passed as well. So we might see a big transformation happening in the legal framework governing postal services in the country. So in this context, we should examine not just the provisions of the bill, but we should also get an insight into the history of post in India. Just a brief history to make the discussion interesting, and you can try and use these points as well in your mains answers. You can even expect an essay topic on the contribution of India Post and the history of post in India, right? Many of them have a wrong assumption that postal services started in India only with colonial initiatives, right? The British have always been credited with introducing postal services, and they even claim, even today, right? Those who support colonialism in Britain, they still claim that they did India a favor by providing postal and telegraph services to the country. They say that it's one of the positives of colonialism, as if they were doing this as a favor to India, right? But in reality, postal and telegraph services introduced by the colonial companies was meant to serve their own interests. These were self-serving initiatives. They were never designed to help Indians. It was not designed to help Indians communicate. Initially, it was launched to serve the economic and political interests of the colonial powers, not the people of India. And also that British introduced post in India is a large misconception, because there is a history, a centuries old history here, and that is what I want you guys to be aware of. Right from the days of the Mauryan Empire, there are documented evidences of different forms of postal communication. See, when we say a post, it need not be in the form of a letter being written and a postman delivering it, right? Post refers to sending messages across. In the Mauryan era itself, there are documented evidences of how pigeons were trained to be used as postal deliveries. It was widely expanded under Emperor Ashoka as well. Then later in 1296, a horse and foot postal system was introduced by Alauddin Khilji of the Khilji dynasty under the Delhi Sultanate. In 1341, Ibn Battuta, the popular Moroccan traveler, he documents the El Volak system, the horse carrier system, and El Dawa foot runner system that was implemented by the Tughlaqs. Essentially, horses would be tied with the postal messages. They would run from place to place, sending the message across. Or foot runners would be deployed. People would be stationed every few hundred kilometers. Their task is to conduct a relay. It's like a relay. They relay the post or the message across different points and ensure it reaches the final intended destination. So Ibn Battuta has documented the presence of these systems. Sher Shah Suri, he set up the Grand Trunk Road. The Grand Trunk Road connecting the two extremes of India. And there are documented evidences to show that postal messaging services were active on the Grand Trunk Road. Even in the Mysore kingdom, under the Wadayars, the Mysore Anche was started in 1600s. These initiatives, they predate the British initiative of establishing a postal system, right? The first British postal system was established in 1727 by the East India Company. That's when the first post office was opened by the British, right? Even other colonial powers, the Dutch, the French, also had tried implementing their own messaging systems. But definitely, British East India Company played a role in formalizing this system. Robert Clive set up a regular postal system, and this was even opened to the public by Warren Hastings in 1774. So you can see that from 1727 to 1774, for almost half a century, for almost 50 years, the postal system introduced by the British was meant to serve only colonial interests. It was reserved only for the empire. It was reserved only for the economic and political interests of the East India Company, not to help Indian people. It was opened up for Indian public only in 1774 by Warren Hastings, right? So there is a deep-rooted history here, But post-independence, the Department of Post that administers India Post has adapted to all the changes that has happened. From delivering humble letters, postcards, to delivering parcels, introducing speed post facility to facilitate quick deliveries, one-day deliveries, to competing with private courier services which were beating India Post, and competing with computers and internet and mobile phones. India Post has done a remarkable task of staying relevant. Despite all these rapid changes, right? Today letters, yes, postcards have become a little irrelevant and outdated. With evolution in technology and the economic changes that have happened, not many people rely on postal services today. But India Post has innovated, it has adapted, it has brought changes as needed to remain relevant and to play a critical role in our economy even today. So how did India Post do this? It not only adopted technology, but it also introduced new services, and it became a key arm of the government to ensure last mile delivery. Let me explain this. See, with the evolution and introduction of computers and internet, even India Post adopted computers and internet. As private courier services came up, India Post introduced Speed Post to compete with them and provide reliable services. Apart from that, it started delivering government services to the public. It started playing a critical role in financial inclusion. By offering banking and insurance services. Right? It started offering saving schemes for the Indians. Now, this was possible because India Post had a remarkable last mile connectivity. There are 1.59 lakh post offices in the country, which means this is one of the government institutions which has tremendous countrywide reach. Even in the remotest corners, in the nooks and corners of the country, India Post has a presence and has a reach. No other government institution can compete with that. Maybe apart from the police, India Post has the maximum reach till the last mile, which means government can use India Post and its digital infrastructure and banking infrastructure to deliver public services, to deliver subsidies directly into the savings account of farmers, to deliver scholarships, pensions directly into the bank accounts opened with post offices, right? So in this regard, the postal services in India have played a key role in social and economic development as well. It has become the arm of the government to deliver and reach to the last mile and provide for socio-economic welfare. This is how India Post has remained relevant over decades, and even today it honestly plays a very, very important role. It's in this context we should take a quick look at the provisions that are being proposed under the new bill. It not only repeals the colonial law, but it authorizes the Director General of Postal Services to make regulations regarding postal activities and the prices that will be charged. Because until now, if the prices of postal services had to be changed to stay relevant in the market, parliamentary approval was necessary under the previous law. Let's say India Post has to compete with private couriers. To remain in competition, it may have to reduce prices. Sometimes it has to increase prices to retain profits. But every time prices had to be changed or postal services had to be changed, permission had to be obtained from the parliament, which is a more difficult, complicated process. This is being removed. The Director General of Postal Services will have the authority to regulate the prices and all the activities and services, which gives more flexibility to India Post to compete in the market. It can compete in the market with private players and it can continue to remain relevant. It can change prices as it wants, introduce new services, cancel loss-making services. That flexibility is being brought in. Next, it is creating a strong legal framework for dispensing citizen-centric public services. The banking, insurance services, and other government benefits which are being directly transferred, they all get a strong legal framework with the new law because the colonial law never accounted for it, right? I'm sure many of you would have seen your parents, your grandparents, they will all have a post office savings bank account. It used to offer a higher rate of interest as well at one point. So India Post has remained relevant in this regard. It still plays a key role in helping central and state governments to directly deliver benefits to the bank accounts of the customers. So now a strong legal framework will be provided for these citizen-centric services. Another important change being made is with regard to power to intercept the parcels and the shipments. Under the previous law, on the basis of suspicion and doubt, post and parcels could be intercepted by the authorities. If they believed that a parcel is dangerous, if it contained any drugs or banned substances or smuggled contraband. So on the grounds of public emergency, public safety and tranquility, government authorities at the central and state level, that is usually the intelligence agencies, they could intercept the post with the help of the postal authorities. And they could break open as well, which is a breach of your privacy. But these powers were given under the previous law. These powers are being continued under the new bill as well, but in a different form. The specific grounds are being mentioned on which posts and parcels can be intercepted. If it threatens the security of the state, if it affects friendly relations of India with foreign countries, on the grounds of public order, emergency, public safety, if it contravenes any provisions of the bill, under these grounds only, posts and parcels can be intercepted by an authorized officer. Essentially, it is limiting the powers compared to before. Previously, there were wide sweeping powers. Now the powers are being limited and also it's a little generic. So writer is saying that there is a concern. This could affect the power of the postal authorities and intelligence agencies to intercept suspicious parcels and posts, which could become a big limitation with regard to our national security. Because it is a known fact that several criminals, smugglers and organized crime cartels, they use postal services to smuggle goods, to even send contraband and drugs to different places. So providing stricter powers, more stringent powers would have been necessary, but it appears that with a generic definition and with specified grounds, the powers are being slightly diluted. And also please understand, none of these provisions will apply for private couriers in the country. This is the other concern writers are pointing out. These provisions apply only for India Post, for the public sector, not for the private sector. So the government does not have much authority even now with regard to intercepting private couriers and private parcels. This aspect has not been covered in the new bill, and that is a shortcoming that the writers are pointing out. Next, there is another big change, a very big positive development. The new bill is introducing digital addressing. Previously, we used to address letters physically by writing the name of the house or the society, right? The door number, the street, the locality as well, and the PIN code. That was a physical address that we were providing. Now, with technology, digital addressing based on geospatial coordinates is becoming the norm, right? This provides for better identification of the address. It will make it easier to sort and deliver the parcels, posts and letters as well. And it could enable drone-based delivery as well, which is a futuristic technology that many countries are working on, right? Drone-based delivery is a reality today. With digital addressing based on geospatial coordinates, the exact coordinates of the location, we can enable drone-based delivery in the future, right? It's a futuristic bill in that regard. It is accounting for futuristic technologies, how we can improve delivery, how we can efficiently sort the parcels and the posts and letters. So for that, physical address is being replaced with digital addressing. Instead of your regular PIN code, a digital code will be introduced, right? Which provides for better delivery, better efficiency, and also the rollout of futuristic technologies. So this is another positive provision in the bill. And finally, the bill is dropping one of the problematic clauses in the colonial law. Under the previous law, the word letter was defined. but document was not clearly defined. This would always cause a confusion. Previously, there was no clear definition of what is a letter, what is a document, who delivers letters, who delivers documents. This was not very clear. The law never dealt with it. So under the Indian legal system, it had been stated that couriers, that is private courier services, they deliver documents, not letters. Whereas letters are delivered only by India Post. This had been the interpretation. This was a legal grey area. This was affecting the regulation of private couriers because private couriers also deliver letters, but legally they were not seen as letter delivery services. Private couriers were only seen as document delivery services. This was due to the lack of definition of what is a letter, what is a document. This discrepancy is being removed entirely by providing for a clear legal demarcation of letters and documents, and it defines the roles of India Post and private couriers. All right? But however, other regulatory provisions, they do not apply for private couriers. So this is where there is a shortcoming. So writer is suggesting that maybe even private couriers should be brought under this law to provide for a strong legal framework and effective regulation of postal services in the country. This completes my detailed discussion of all the big articles and columns. Now let's head towards the prelim section and take a quick look at the smaller articles. We have an article on page number 4 referring to the fishermen dispute between India and Sri Lanka. This has remained a long-standing dispute. So I'll explain what the dispute is all about briefly, and you should note the development. According to this article, 17 fishermen from Tamil Nadu, mainly from the Rameshwaram region, they have crossed over the international maritime boundary line and they have illegally entered Sri Lankan waters. And accordingly, Sri Lankan Navy has arrested the Indian fishermen. They have been detained on the grounds of trespassing into Sri Lankan territory. So this is a long-standing issue that has affected our bilateral ties since 1970s, 1980s. See, between India and Sri Lanka, there is a international maritime boundary line, the Indo-Sri Lanka maritime boundary. You can see that depicted in this map over here. These boundaries were demarcated through bilateral agreements in 1974 and 1976. That was signed between the then Indira Gandhi government and the Sri Lankan government. So through mutual negotiations, we peacefully settled the maritime boundary and the international maritime boundary line came up. Now, according to the UN clause, the UN Convention on Law of the Sea that governs all maritime jurisdiction, UN clause says that whatever resources are present in a country's exclusive economic zone solely belongs to that country. Now, you are looking at Sri Lanka's EEZ, this whole area in slightly darker blue. It represents Sri Lanka's exclusive economic zone. So all the resources present here, be it hydrocarbons, fisheries, and even minerals present on the seafloor, they all belong exclusively to Sri Lanka, and foreign countries or foreign entities can't exploit that. Similarly, resources found in India's EEZ solely belongs to India. That's why it's called exclusive economic zone. But the problem is that fishermen from Tamil Nadu, from coastal areas here, they are frequently known to cross over the boundary line and enter Sri Lankan waters to carry out illegal fishing in Sri Lanka's EEZ. Now the question is, why do Tamil Nadu fishermen cross over into the Sri Lankan side? The main reason is because near Gulf of Mannar and Park Bay, we have exhausted our fishing resources due to overfishing by using mechanized boats and bottom trawling methods, right, which is not environment friendly. We have exhausted most of the fishing resources, and this pushes Tamil Nadu fishermen to cross the maritime boundary line and enter Sri Lankan waters, right? So this is one concern. The other issue is related to an island called Kachativu in the Park Bay region between Rameshwaram and the Jaffna region of Sri Lanka. You have a small island called the Kachativu Island. The Kachativu Island belonged to India, but when we settled the boundary in 1976, India gave away Kachativu Island to Sri Lanka out of goodwill, to maintain good relations and to finalize the boundary line, we transferred Kachativu to Sri Lanka. But historically, Kachativu Island has been important for fishermen from Tamil Nadu as well. Fishermen from both the sides have been using Kachativu historically. They used to rest here, dry their nets, park the boats. There is also an important church, the St. Thomas Church, where an annual fest is held, which is important for the Tamil Christian community, both from Tamil Nadu and also from Jaffna. But since we transferred Kachativu and the border became a hard border because of the civil war in the country, access to Kachativu for Tamil Nadu fishermen has been restricted by Sri Lankan authorities. Because see, the civil war in Sri Lanka that broke out from 70s and 80s, led by the LTTE, increased the security threat in the region. Because LTTE militants and even Tamil refugees who were fleeing the conflict, they would use the same region to cross over to the Indian side to seek shelter in India. So as a result, Sri Lanka became very strict with regard to enforcing the maritime laws, and it blocked the entry of Tamil Nadu fishermen. It restricted access to Kachativu Island as well. So Tamil Nadu fishermen historically have economic ties with Kachativu, cultural ties with Kachativu. So that is also a reason why they repeatedly cross over. So every time Tamil Nadu fishermen are caught on the other side, it leads to clashes with Sri Lankan fishermen, or Sri Lankan Navy or Coast Guard, they open fire, they sink the boats. Many times our fishermen are injured and sometimes they get killed as well. And in other cases, the Tamil Nadu fishermen are arrested and kept in Sri Lankan jails for years together. Whenever these issues happen, it becomes a very big political issue in Tamil Nadu. The political pressure builds up and this puts pressure on the central government and it affects India-Sri Lanka relations. So this is one important issue that you should be aware of, because the topic is relevant even today. Even though it's an old topic, we bring up the issue every time because we still haven't found a solution, a viable solution for the fishermen dispute. Next, on page 14, we have an article related to Indian economy. The government has placed a limit. It has placed a limit and reduced the existing limit on wheat stocks. As you know, wheat is a staple, right? A very important cereal, part of the Indian diet. So the limit of wheat stock holding has been reduced further to tackle hoarding. Is that clear? Because the government noticed that wheat prices in the market was increasing, causing an inflationary situation. And as wheat is a staple in our diet, the increasing wheat prices will hurt the common man. All right, the current stock holding limit for stockholders, then retailers and wholesalers was at 3,000 metric tons. As per the Essential Commodities Act of 1955, wholesalers, retailers, all the big retail chains and stockholders, they were allowed to hold up to 3,000 metric tons of wheat as a stock. But the government has noticed that the middlemen are misusing the higher limit and they are hoarding the supplies. This is an artificial shortage being created in the market, right? There is a nexus between some of the middlemen, and the government has noticed that wheat is being deliberately stockpiled, not being released in the open market, and they are deliberately creating this artificial shortage to increase the prices so that they can make more profits. This practice of hoarding is illegal and punishable under the Essential Commodities Act of 1955. The government has the powers to punish hoarders, those who are hoarding stocks, creating artificial shortages and manipulating the price. They can be punished under this law. So now the government has exercised its powers under the law and it has reduced the stock holding limit. It has brought down the stock holding limit from 3,000 metric tons to 2,000 metric tons, and this will be strictly enforced by the state governments and local authorities. So with reduced stock holding limit, it will bring more wheat supply into the market, it will balance the demand supply equation, and thus it will help in stabilizing the prices. So that is the key development you should understand. Next, on page 15, we have an article referring to the National Judicial Data Grid. The National Judicial Data Grid is an e-governance initiative that is based on the e-courts platform to modernize our judiciary and use technology in the judiciary to tackle the backlog of cases and also to bring efficiency into the judicial process and also to make judicial documents accessible to the common man, to the common public. So at all the levels of the judiciary, starting from your local district level courts to high courts, this platform was created called National Judicial Data Grid, where the common people could have real-time access to all legal and judicial documents. When cases are filed, when cases are still going on or pending, and if judgments are passed, the final judgment documents, all those documents could be accessed by the common public through the National Judicial Data Grid. On this data grid, the Supreme Court was still not present. Lower judiciary and high courts were added. And now the Supreme Court also has integrated its digital database with the National Judicial Data Grid. That is the big development. With this, common man can access all the legal judicial documents related to any case. This will help in fast-tracking cases, keeping track of ongoing cases. It will bring more efficiency into the judicial process on the back end, on the side of the judiciary. And it will bring more accessibility to the public as well, where we can access every legal and judicial document. So please make a note about the National Judicial Data Grid. Next, on page 16, we have an article referring to Section 26 of Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. I hope you know that the UAPA is the primary anti-terror law in the country. This is the legal weapon used by the National Investigation Agency to deal with terror cases in India. NIA is the premier law enforcement agency for counter-terrorism, established through the NIA Act in 2009. It was established after the Mumbai attacks, the 26/11 attacks. So NIA enforces the NIA Act and UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act of 1967, which has been amended to make it the anti-terror law of the country. So under this law, there is a provision. There is a provision under Chapter 5 that deals with proceeds of terrorism. Usually this concept is used in money laundering cases. With regard to money laundering, we have a law, the PMLA, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Under PMLA, as prescribed by FATF, according to Financial Action Task Force, there is a provision where the proceeds of the crime, that is whatever wealth or whatever asset is generated through money laundering, it can be confiscated. It can be confiscated by the authorities, by the law enforcement agency. It can be attached to the ongoing case, and it can be forfeited by the court, meaning the courts can take over these properties or these assets and even liquidate them. And this is one way of tackling money laundering, one very effective way of tackling money laundering. This is a mandatory requirement under FATF provisions. We have included this under Prevention of Money Laundering Act. So with regard to money laundering, the law enforcement agency is Enforcement Directorate. So ED has the powers under PMLA to confiscate property and assets which are procured through money laundering channels. They can be attached to the ongoing case as proceeds of money laundering, proceeds of crime, and they can be forfeited by the court and liquidated later as well. This concept was present in UAPA as well. With regard to terrorism, if there were any assets which were being used for terror activities, like let's say a house or a property or funds, that could be labeled as proceeds of terrorism, and this could be confiscated by the law enforcement agency, attached to the case, and it could be forfeited by the court, where it could be liquidated and taken over by the state. But this provision was not being used by the law enforcement agencies because the provision could become controversial. But now NIA has started deploying this as a tool against terrorism. We have seen two back-to-back cases where NIA has pressed these charges. It has confiscated properties that were being used for terror activities by a Khalistani module, and in another case, property belonging to a IS module, Islamic State module, has been confiscated by NIA. Along with confiscating the property, it has been attached to the case, and it has invoked Section 26, where the court can order the forfeiture of the proceeds of terrorism. which means the property can be sold, liquidated, or taken over by the state. And this puts an economic cost on the terrorists who are planning attacks against India. It will curb their economic resources to plan and organize attacks against India, because there will be a fear of losing these assets. Because NIA will push these properties, it will take them over, attach them to the ongoing case, and it will push for liquidation of these assets through court orders. Alright? So please be aware of the concept of proceeds of terrorism. It's similar to proceeds of money laundering. Next article on page 16 refers to the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana. The Union Minister of State for Fisheries, Animal Husbandry and Dairying, Mr. L. Murugan, writes this article. He points out how India has become the world's top fish and aquaculture producing country. We are in the top 3 list. If you look at the fish production, right, and if you look at aquaculture around the world, India has entered the top 3 list. We are one of the top 3 producers of fish and other aquatic products. The minister is crediting the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana that was launched by the government of India in 2020. It's implemented by the Department of Fisheries for the time period 2020 to 2025. This ambitious scheme, it aims to introduce a blue revolution. Just like the dairy industry was revolutionized by the White Revolution, Blue Revolution through Matsya Sampada Yojana, it hopes to drive India's fish production and bring India into the top league of fish producing countries. So it is designed to benefit the fishermen and the coastal communities as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat package. So under this, special incentives have been given to fishermen through a central sector scheme and centrally sponsored scheme. There are 2 components under it, and they provide easier credit for fishermen to procure boats, nets, and modern motors and other equipment needed for fishing. It also provides the right technology, the implements, and the government will also provide the required expertise through better training so that the fishermen can focus on not just fishing in the seas and natural water bodies, but also on aquaculture where fish can be reared and bred. Right? So this is the focus of the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana. And according to the Union Minister of State, India has entered the top list. We are one of the top 3 fish producing countries in the world. Coming to the last article on page 11 and 18, we have a couple of updates regarding the devastating floods in Libya. I was mentioning this yesterday as well, if you remember. In Libya, there has been a massive disaster. It's a huge tragedy which has occurred. See, Libya is this North African country that faces the Mediterranean Sea. All right? And the country is currently going through a major civil war. Since 2011, since the Arab Spring movement, the dictatorial government of Gaddafi was brought down. There was a Western intervention as well by France, Britain and US, and they toppled Gaddafi's government and Gaddafi was killed as well. After this, there has been a long-standing civil war in the country. So governance has completely fallen apart. Forget disaster management, forget early warning systems, basic governance is not available in the country. So in this country, which is war-torn for almost a decade, there were devastating rains that occurred in this part of Libya due to a storm called Storm Daniel. Please remember the name. There was a storm, a cyclonic storm essentially, that originated in the Mediterranean Sea, named as Storm Daniel, that brought torrential rainfall in this part of Libya, and it flooded the rivers, and especially the city of Derna that you see here in the map, along with parts of Benghazi and Al-Marj. They have been completely devastated. The rainfall received was so high, and there was no preparedness, there was no early warning, no evacuations done. Multiple dams, they burst due to the breach in capacity. Multiple bridges collapsed. As a result, there were massive flash floods across cities like Derna, where thousands and thousands have been killed. Initial estimates are putting the death count at 5,000 plus. It might reach 18,000, 20,000. More than 10,000 people are missing. In today's world, witnessing deaths in the rate of 20,000 in a disaster is very huge and massive, because today the world has made a lot of progress in disaster management, especially with regard to cyclones, heavy rainfall, floods. We have early warning systems available. Look at how India has transformed itself through better early warning, right? The IMD, India Meteorological Department, and other early warning agencies have done a remarkable job as part of our disaster management governance. Because early warning and forecasting is a critical tool in your pre-disaster phase. Before a disaster occurs, if you're invested in the right technology, right? If you have satellites, you have Doppler radars and other sensors and tools that are needed, you can look out for such extreme weather events. You can predict them accurately. You can give very accurate forecasts. And if you can transmit the alert in real time, if you create a system where the alerts can be disseminated in real time to all the authorities and local people, this will give you enough time for an evacuation. That is what India does during every cyclone. Now look at the super cyclone of 1999 that hit Odisha. We didn't have effective disaster management. We didn't have effective early warning. So 10,000 people were killed in Odisha in 1999. But today, we have even higher intensity cyclones hitting the east coast of India, but the death count is in single digits. That is the progress India has made because we have invested in disaster management and made a lot of changes in early warning and in dissemination of real-time alerts. But Libya, which is a war-torn country, has not been able to do this. That is why this damage is being reported. I'm talking about this because the World Meteorological Organization of the UN has pointed out this concern. UN's WMO has pointed out that this tragedy has occurred in Libya because evacuation didn't happen. Because there were no real-time alerts, there was no early warning. And it highlights the importance of early warning in disaster management. That is the key point I wanted to make before I close the discussion for today. This completes all the key articles in the newspaper. Trust me, you don't have to go back and read the paper again. I hope the session has been useful. Do let me know how it went in the comments and take up these questions for your practice. So let's see you again tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.